Welcome to the knees over toes trial. You are the jury. I'm going to start with the case observation, then we're going to go into precedence, and last we'll look at the concrete evidence, because there isn't concrete evidence behind everything I do. So at the end of this, you are going to tell me yes or no, in or out. Am I guilty or am I not guilty? Let's start with observation. So one of the first things you'll notice about knees over toes is that you can't go downstairs without knee over toe, or you'll end up in a position, why don't you come over here, baby, to the side? You'll end up in a position like I was. So after so many years of chronic knee pain surgeries, I would basically have to either pick one leg as the good leg and then go down like that, one side at a time, or sometimes it was so bad I would just go down backwards so that it wasn't knee over toe, or I'd basically end up in one of these where I'd be like using my arm. So looking at observation, well, if we know that to function properly our knee has to go over our toe, well, what if then you just have the muscular protection and you can handle that motion without it being beyond what your muscles can handle? So this is my case, is that getting stronger with my knee over my toe allowed me to take these motions that were once painful and then be able to do them without pain or excessive force. Now let's go out to a different environment and let's look at some more observation. So now I'm going just to a flat area so we can look at sport examples. So in sports, first off, if you want to get low, you can bend your hips is one thing you can do, but to get into these positions that players are making, your knee will go over your toe. It goes over your toe when you shoot a jump shot. Definitely when you jump, the power comes from the hips, but then you'll notice with all top jumpers, whether it's a standing jump, right there, the knees do go over the toes. And especially when you go into a running jump, you'll notice this that inside knee goes boom right there over the toe, and then also notice the landing. So if you look at these landings, our athletes are landing, the knee goes over the toe, but you'll also see that in sports, we tend to reach with one side or the other. So not only is the knee going over the toe, but usually it's going over toe one side first, putting a tremendous amount of force into that knee over toe. So that's the observation side. The observation side is just that, well, in sports and in life, our knee does go over our toe. Now going into precedence, okay, what precedence do we have of this? Well, right off the bat, if we go to ancient Chinese times, we see that the elderly walk backwards. So this has been done all the way up. It's still being done today. And you have elderly walking backwards, which if you see from a side angle, when you walk backwards, your knee is over your toe. So you're actually strengthening, you're taking a motion that might hurt and you're just strengthening it at your own level backwards. Now that's in elderly, right? So we have the precedence, and again, that's not a study of these Chinese people. That's just them doing it and us having a 1:19 ratio of Chinese versus US knee replacements. So when your knees run out of cartilage, which is the cushioning, you start to get arthritis. And when arthritis gets so bad, doctors may prescribe you knee replacement where they just replace your whole freaking knee. So we only know those stats, but there's not a study on that. This is just precedent. So we know that backing walkwards has been used for thousands of years. Now going further than walking backwards, we know that the Canadian national ski team burst onto the scene. They were having almost every athlete with a knee surgery, to then having no athletes with knee surgery by getting stronger in a reverse step-up motion. So they were getting stronger and actually turning this into a weight room exercise of getting stronger in reverse. So that's another example we have. Then we also know, why don't you come back around here? We also know that the Chinese, this is almost called an Asian squat, a full bend squat. And this actually does have some research on it, but we also know basically that in America, we tend to end up stopping squatting, whereas the Asians maintain this ability. And then in my case, that ability, because I had imbalances from basketball, that didn't work for me, just squatting. I had to turn that into a split squat, so building it one side at a time. And now don't let that scare you, okay? We'll we'll fast forward it back to the stair and take a look for a second.
Okay.
That ass to grass style split squat, you could start, you would actually do it to the inside. You could start with assistance and with your front foot elevated, meaning notice there's less angle, so there's less weight on the front leg. So as you come down, there's more weight then on the front leg. So anyone could progress this. I've never failed in person to get someone into this pain-free. So again, and this one we will go into, there's some research on the ability of full bend, but we know that full bend, again, we're in the precedence part, not gonna work for everyone because maybe you didn't maintain that ability perfectly. So now if you're trying to recover and you wanna get to where that full bend is pain-free, how do you get to where that full bend is pain-free? Assisted, elevated. Now think over time, this creates adaptation, it takes time, and then you gradually work your way down until you can do it flat ground, until you don't need assistance. And then again, in terms of, well, let's go back out here. Now even further and more extreme in the knees over toes is what people call a sissy squat. And sissy squat gets a bad name. It was actually named after a Greek mythology character, Sisyphus, who had to roll a boulder up a mountain for infinity, so he had the strongest quads in the universe. Sissy squat, not a great name. I just call it a KOT squat, knees over toes squat, because how would you squat down if your hips couldn't bend? So this ability of going knees to the floor with full control and no pain, you can see it gets pretty hard for sports or life to cause me any difficulty. But you have some of the most well-known trainers in the world saying that's the worst exercise you can do. But again, we went over observation and we're segueing into precedence. Well, what precedence is there? The precedence is Tom Platz. Look up Tom Platz. Tom Platz is now in his 60s. He had arguably the best bodybuilding legs of all time. He did have the ability to go knees over toes to the floor with no pain. And now he's in his 60s, and when he goes to the bottom of a squat, he can still go rock bottom, he can still do heavy loads, while most of his competitors of that time period are either dead or have knee replacements now themselves. So if I'm making my case, I'm going, there is no precedence for that being bad, but of course any of these things, just like no one's arguing about the effectiveness of a depth jump. A depth jump is when you stand on something, you jump off. No one's arguing about the effectiveness of that. It's very well proven, but also no one's saying to go, if you go do that depth jump on a 10-story building, you might die. You see that? So we're only talking about doing this at pain-free doses. And again, this is knees over toes right here. And my whole system is built on this principle of actually never working through pain. Because if you're working through pain in the joint, it means that perhaps more damage is happening to the joint than positive adaptation we're making to the muscles that protect. So your number one rule is to never work through pain. So we've got some interesting, precedents there. For thousands of years, a much healthier knee culture is strengthening knees over toes, can do a full bend, and then I wouldn't have over a 40-inch vertical without the KOT squat, without that extreme leg strength. I wouldn't have a 40-inch vertical. My vertical had stopped. So it wasn't just enough for me to do what was safe, but that also doesn't mean that everyone has to do a KOT squat. But even your grandparents could walk backwards and change their life and prevent a knee replacement, which costs up to $57,000 a pop, of which there were 790,000 in the US last year, costing patients and taxpayers over $40 billion, and which on investigation, 1 in 3 was found to be prescribed unethically, meaning it didn't have the conditions warranting doing a knee replacement. And it was supposed that the doctors simply found it so profitable that they were unethically doing it to make more money, and then look into the complications of having that surgery. Just because you have that surgery, now what changes? Much higher chance of obesity after, because you're sidelined for so long. Very hard to ever build up to being able to jog or play with your grandkids or anything like that, not to mention a fairly high chance of dying of complications of the surgery itself. So in terms of precedence, it's not looking good for avoiding the ability of the knee go over toe. Now let's get into to the evidence department. So the first thing that occurred in 1970 is a study said that when your knee goes over your toe, it puts more pressure on your knee. I think it was 22% more pressure. Well, that's kind of like you could say that for any exercise. When you do a push-up, it puts more pressure on your shoulder or something like that. Because when another study was done, it was found that if you prevent the knee going over the toe, it ends up being 10 times more pressure on your back. So you end up with this thing where should it be knee over toe, or should it be like, and it's neither, okay? The whole goal of my system is not to avoid your hips, but is to build proportionately between knee and hip, so they're both capable in measurable ratio. But again, we'll stay with the evidence side here. We're on the concluding evidence. So there is no evidence that knees over toes is bad, only that it puts more pressure on your knee. Well, naturally. And there's only evidence that when you intentionally restrict, so they put a board right here, when you restrict what someone would naturally do, you end up not with less knee over toe, but with proportionally more pressure on your back than you would have just by letting yourself do it naturally. So it seems that restricting natural human movement proportionately, based on the evidence, gives you more chance of getting hurt to some other area of your body. So moving on in the evidence department. If you're gonna improve your knee strength, well, I quickly found out that by jacking up my knees, I got shin splints. I got that pain right through here. I fixed that by strengthening this tibialis muscle, which starts here and wraps around to the inside. There is no study on strengthening the tibialis, but there's study on testing it and determining that it helps older people to be able to walk longer if it's stronger. Just like I told you, there's no study on what happens if we have people walk backwards, but there is a study on what happens if we test how well people walk backwards, and they determined that for elderly, it's an excellent test. It's an excellent predictor of the older person's quality of life in their knees and their walking, is how well do they walk backwards. So we know that this muscle is implicated, and we know that walking backwards is implicated, but again, you're gonna have to decide, because they haven't just said, let's strengthen this muscle, let's work on backward walking and see what happens. But there's precedence for these things, and there's testing of the end result, just not of what happens if you work on it. The next one we know is the ankle. The tighter the ankle, well, the pressure has to go somewhere. So the better your ankle can bend, the less pressure goes to your knee. It happens more naturally. If your ankle can't bend, more pressure goes up to the knee. So that's some solid evidence there that you have more chance of knee ligament tear and chronic pain if your ankle can't bend well, because it can't distribute the way it should. And then we also now, doctors analyzed 164 research papers on this full bend. Their conclusion on full bend was that not only is it not bad for your knees, it actually provides injury prevention and performance benefit if you build it up the right way, which again, I found that if you have imbalances between sides, you simply need to build it up one side at a time. So because this is full bend, and because I can do other exercises for my back, I don't think you ever have to do squats. Not that you couldn't, and you can measurably predict how much weight should you squat by how well can you handle one side at a time and how strong is your back, but you don't have to do it. So there's 164 research papers that have nothing to do with me, that doctors themselves determined, yep, this is not only not bad, but actually has injury prevention, builds up the muscles around. And then we know that Olympic weightlifters who do that deep bend, and I mean, they're trying to kill themselves in these positions, and we're only talking about gently doing it. And even with them trying to kill themselves in these positions, they were found to have more stable knees than sports where they don't go all the way down. They were found to have 37% thicker tendons than sports that don't go all the way down. So as you can see, there's no, my favorite exercises, there's no studies on them. There's no study on the ass to grass split squat. There's no study on the Patrick step up. There's no study on reversed out knee pain, which is its own whole line. There's no study on doing the tibialis raise. So that's why you're in this position. I did no second takes. I said, I'm gonna treat this as if it's a case. I'm not gonna get any second takes. I'm gonna have to put myself on the line to say what I say, just as if I was in front of a real jury where I can't rewind and try it again. So now it's up to you. I've given you what I know. I've given you my heart and soul on this topic that's taken me 10 years to learn, which I devote 7 days a week to coaching people through it, actually seeing your form videos, which doesn't exist. There's no other service in my price range where you can actually have a coach watch your form and progression. So that's my heart and soul, but I wanted to leave it up to you to decide, am I guilty or not guilty? Not guilty meaning I'm doing the right thing. Guilty meaning no, knees over toes is bad. So guilty, no knees over toes, or not guilty, gentle progression of the ability with knee over toe. You tell me. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you don't send me to KOT prison.